What's up, What's up, plastic sniffers? This episode, I'm scratch building a metal as dinosaur head inspired by the instrumental metal band Tyrannosaurus Dimension. Stick around for what might be the best graffiti I've ever put on a sculpture. I don't always sketch before a sculpture, but this time I'm not starting with a specific piece of scrap plastic for the head shape. I'm going to use cardboard for that, so I want to rough out the overall concept here so I know what shapes I need to start cutting out. This'll do. I'm sourcing my cardboard from the Celestial Seasonings tea box. I'm a big Bengal spice guy myself, but I've been known to slam down a lemon zinger or a cozy chamomile when I'm raging on a Saturday night.
What's your favorite Celestial Seasonings tea flavor?
I'll be covering the cardboard in foam, so I'm going to go ahead and cut that to fit now. Sadly, once I get it all assembled, I realize the head is a little too thick. In the sketch you can see it's narrower. Mine looks a bit like a whale.
There she blows like a hump on a snow hill. It's moving.
Now I'm trimming it down to size, which would have been a lot easier to do before I glued it all together. Now I need to cut room for his ears, which are going to be made out of these parmesan cheese caps. I could have also done this before, but measuring is just no fun at all, and the sort of thing that makes me never want to get started on a project, so sometimes it's better just to wing it. Next, I need to cut a slot for the plumage at the back of his head. There's really no way I could have predicted the need for this ahead of time, so again with the cutting through layers of cardboard and congealed hot glue. Now I'm starting to super glue down the foam exterior. I'm going to cover every side of him, but first I want to be sure to glue my fingers together. Ungluing in T-3, 2, 1.
Wait for it.
Yes! Now I'm covering the lower jaw. I don't show the build process for that piece, but it's the same as the top of the head. Just cardboard hot glued together with some foam over top of it. Now I'm trying a brand new foam clay that's supposed to be better for smoothing and sanding than what I've used before. I used to hate foam clay, but I feel like I understand its strengths and weaknesses a little bit better now. Half the battle is just not letting it sense your fear. Keep working it, smoothing it over with water, and never ever let it see you sweat. Now I give it a quick sanding in my high-tech abrading chamber to keep the foam dust out of my lungs. Then I'm gluing in the Parmesan cheese caps and dry fitting the jaw to make sure everything lines up. I need something stiff for his teeth, so I'm cutting up this Tide container. First I have to get the label off, and that's a huge pain. Lots of sanding, lots of heat, I try pretty much everything. Brutalizing it in the sanding chamber ultimately does the trick. Then I realize how difficult this plastic is to cut. My wife lets me borrow her gardening shears, which do an incredible job, so I buy myself a pair. Now I'm gluing those teeth in, times 80. T-Rexes have these flaps of skin on the side of their mouths called mundplatte, which is maybe my new favorite word. It sounds very German.
Ach ja, hat eine ausgezeichnete Mundplatte.
So I'm building those out of a thick craft foam and then gluing them to the tongue, which will sit flush with the bottom of the mouth. It's a little tricky to get just right with the two halves of the jaw being separated. After a lot of trial and error, I finally get it sorted. But the inside of the mouth's looking a little boring now, so I'll add some old printer bits on the inside to give it a little more visual interest. Now I'm doing a mix of super glue and baking soda to crust it up a bit. Then I start playing around with different eye sockets and placement for them. I try a bunch of different things and settle on this prescription medicine cap nested inside a Miralax cap. I don't even use Miralax. Some old guy gave me a bunch of these. Look,
I'm not constipated. You're constipated.
and hey, if you're enjoying this video so far, please consider liking and subscribing. Even better, leave a comment. Really helps me out, helps the channel grow. Appreciate it. For his plumage, I've got this Orajel mouthwash bottle I've been saving. It's a great mouthwash for people with mouth sores. Constipated people with
Gaping oral wounds.
Then I grab a soap pump for one of the other plumes. And a Melissa and Doug water-based pen from one of my kids' toys that got left lying around. He'll never miss it. More super glue and baking soda to crust it up.
Don't forget to wear your respirator.
Now I'm packing foam clay in around the plumes to nest the smokestacks into. That's looking good. More super glue and baking soda crust for the eye sockets. Next, I'm using epoxy clay around the eyes to blend them into the rest of the head. Then I play with some caps to nest inside the Parmesan cheese lid ears. I nest some little gears and bits inside there for character, then brush in more super glue and baking soda for crust.
It's all about the crust.
Then on the other ear, a spice cap with a medicine bottle and chicken broth cap nested inside. I've got some conduit and wires I'm going to nest into the ears. I want it to look like his ears used to be covered, but the caps popped off and now we're seeing all the exposed junk inside. His nose definitely needs more character, so I grabbed this inkjet printer cartridge connector and modify a few bits from it to glue on his face. See? See how nice that is? Now he needs some nostrils, so I cut a nose hole and use a little ring with some wire mesh around it. Glue that in place. Then inside his mouth, I want a bunch of wires and guitar string, so I'm nesting little doodads in there so I have a place to slot them into. Yeah, that works. Then I think this soap dispenser looks like a nice addition, so I cut out a spot for it and glue it in place. Here's another little piece from an old printer I found. I cut it down and place it next to the ear for a little extra sizzle. Now he's ready for a coat of Flex Bond to seal the foam for a smoother finish when I paint it. Then I slot in a pipe for the base of his neck so I can attach him to the plinth later on in the build. This is all stuff that needs to happen before I can attach the top of the head to the jaw. I don't like the exposed flange, so I cut out a 4-pack top, remount the middle, and slot that over the flange to cover it. That looks much nicer. Now I prime him in a mix of black and white. Most of his final paint job will be white, but there's also a lot of exposed rusty metal, and the black base coat will be better for those parts. I mix up a brown base coat with equal parts Folk Art dark brown and Pro Acryl burnt sienna and slop that on. The messier the better. Then I go in with a slightly redder tint to add some variety. Next I use a Folk Art dark brush gray metallic for a steely look on the mundplatte and teeth. Then I pick out a few highlights in the rusty areas where the metal might be showing through. Now I'm gluing some wires to a piece of foam that I'll slot into the back of his mouth. And drilling a hole to place a few wires in the base of the soap dispenser pump. Again, I'm just trying to take care of all these hard to reach spots while the upper jaw and lower jaw are still disconnected. Then I go in with the rust brown and hit any spots that might make more sense as rust than white paint. Like this little spot of crusty superglue that was stuck on his cheek here. And this spot around his nostril where he's definitely been bonking his big schnoz into things. I always try to think about what areas would actually be coming into contact with stuff if he were a real robot. Now I finally glue his jaw to the rest of his head. And we're ready for some graffiti. Here I'm sketching out one of my ideas. Sometimes I just wing it, but this time I used AI to come up with a few designs. I'll often find or take pictures of graffiti I like, but I'll want to change it to a specific word like wizard in this case. That feels like a decent use of AI that's not too thefty, but let me know how you feel about it. I know AI is controversial, but I figure it's coming for us all, so I have a bit of a if you can't beat 'em, join 'em mentality. Gotta say, I'm pretty pumped with how this one's coming out. These shuttle art markers are great. Not a sponsor. Here's another tag I saw in a picture somewhere that I think looks really cool, and I failed pretty miserably at recreating it, but that's okay. It all becomes part of the pastiche of mixed quality graffiti on this robot. I mean, not all street art's created equal anyway. This one's supposed to say D-Train, like dinosaur train. Kind of looks like it's saying something else, but that's fine. Most graffiti is nonsense anyway. While we're watching me draw graffiti, let's do some shoutouts. Shout out to Gear T for emailing me some pictures of his really cool servo skull build. Keep up the great work. Shout out to Applausen2188 for our first comment in Norwegian. Man, I love me some Norwegian black metal. Enslaved, Immortal, Satyricon, Emperor, Arcturus. Tough to pick a favorite. Shout out to Pieboy and Vince Beige, apologies if I butchered that, for our first French comments. France, home of the excellent thrash band Verbal Razors, Desert Rockers Appaloosa, and of course, a little band flying under the radar called Gojira. Shout out to DRL001 for suggesting I heat up my bass strings to make them easy to bend. That may come in handy later on this build, spoiler alert. Shout out to Bucklalon9529 for catching that dope Transformers the movie reference last episode. Shout out to friend of the show, the Artificer77 for suggesting a clear coat prior to doing the wash to help keep the markers from running. The Artificer has a really cool YouTube channel you guys should check out. He does dope scratch builds with really clever visual storytelling, link in the description. That's all the time we have for shoutouts this episode. Keep those comments coming and maybe next time you'll get your name read out to literally hundreds of viewers. This bit of graffiti is based on a real piece I found online. Something about this music and the fantasy theme feels very nerdy to me in a good way, so I typed in nerd graffiti and this is what came up. I don't love this color palette that I picked here. It looks very candy-like, kind of like the Nerds candy, but it's on the top of the head where it won't get much attention anyway. And I've been trying to practice graffiti in places where the stakes aren't so high, trying something different where it doesn't matter as much. Now I'm adding a few Tyrannosaurus Dimension inspired words here and there, tundra, rogue, and then some racing stripes. Gotta have racing stripes. For the stripes, we'll use Pro Acryl Pyrrole Red. I'm just lightly tapping the paint on with a sponge, hoping less of the paint will bleed under the tape this time. And would you look at that? Then I go in and scrawl some nonsense little doodles just to make it look like different people have been adding random marks over time. These little bits of garbage street art really add to the texture, but man, it feels like you're ruining a perfectly good paint job when you're actually doing it. I feel like the nose needs one last bigger tag on it. I think this is based on a real piece of graffiti I saw somewhere. I just like the look of it. I go over the graffiti with a white painted sponge, tapping down spots to make it look like the paint is peeling or wearing away. Then I do a nouche wash, nouche mixed with brown and black. I paint it on, let it dry for a few minutes, and then wipe it back until I get the look I want. I want him to look nice and streaky, like he's been out in the rain and mud and just general grossness. Looks like the artificer was right about putting that clear coat on before the wash. No smearing at all this time. Thanks, buddy. Now I'm going back with brown paint along the edges again and any places where it looks like he'd be bumping into walls and things. I tap a bit of that brown paint on with a sponge in places where I want the white to look worn. It's really starting to come together now. Next I go in with metallic paint on the edges to suggest more recent damage that cuts through the rust and exposes fresh metal. Here I'm completely dousing the neck and base plate with glue and baking soda to make it nice and crusty before painting. Then I glue on some little doodads that we'll feed wires from his neck into. This will all make sense later on. Cover that area with brown. Then I cut little strips of craft foam and form them into ring shapes to wrap around the neck wires. I paint those first, then slide them onto the little cables and wires coming out of his neck, which poke into those doodads we glued down earlier. I also feed a little more wire into his ears to make it look like more functional bits have been exposed. Now it's time for the dirty down rust phase, where things really come to life. I slathered on anything that's already been painted rust brown to give it a nice weathered texture. I go over all of his teeth and the inside of his mouth with it and do a little streaking with it to really sell the effect. And here I'm playing around with the eyes. I print some eye designs and glue them to glass cabochons, but I don't like how they look. They're too cartoony compared to the rest of him, which feels more grounded in reality. I've got a CCTV lens that looks awesome in there. Problem is I have to cut out the eye slot and carve away a good chunk of epoxy clay to get it to fit properly. So I get out the wood burning tool to cut through a couple layers of plastic, super fumey, so again, respirator and good ventilation for this kind of work. It does a pretty good job, but I still need to go back in with the Dremel to get the fit just right. Minor Bob Ross moment here. When I was dremeling, I cut a hole straight through the top of his head. But it actually looks cool, like rusted metal, so I turned it into a happy little accident. Once I get some brown paint and rust on it, it's gonna look great. I only have one of these CCTV lenses, so on the other eye, I glue in some gears, paint it brown, and turn it into a damaged eye socket. Literally just dumping CA glue on things at this point. We gotta wrap this guy up. Ain't nobody got time for squeezing bottles. I go in with brown paint to fix a few spots that got scuffed while I was wrestling the lens into place, and I paint that new rusty hole in the top of his head. I tap a little red paint into the rust to bring it to life, then a bit of yellow. Now I'm wiring up the lighting for his eyeball. As cool as functional lighting is, this is my least favorite part of the build. So much fiddly twisting. There's a photovoltaic sensor on there like I used on the Voivod sculpture, so the eye will automatically light up in the dark. The lens optics are super sensitive to the placement of the light bulb, If it's not perfectly centered, it looks really dim. So I drill a hole in the center of a water bottle cap, push the bulb into the hole, and then slot the cap onto the end of the camera lens, and it fits like a glove. There's the light sensor, and you can see some exposed wires, so I lean into that and start feeding a bunch of thin wires in there so it's like a little nest of exposed wiring in the back of his head. And then here's me heating up those bass guitar strings to make them easier to bend, and repeatedly burning my fingers. Hot! I add some exposed wires to his busted eye, but they're not super visible. So I take a hammer to an LED, bust it up, and then I paint it and glue it into place for a little extra damage. For the plinth, I'm using this base from a store-bought gluten-free chocolate cake. I sand it, rough it up, and paint it metallic so it looks like a big manhole cover or something industrial. I intended to lightly dry brush it, but I end up going a lot heavier than planned, but that's okay. When I set it next to the sculpture, it looks too clean, like the two just don't go together, so I put another coat of dirty down rust over the metallic paint job. This is the first time I've used dirty down rust over metallic paint instead of that base coat of brown, and it looks so much better, so I think I'll probably start with metallic paint next time. One last detail, I feel like he needs some wires poking out of his neck like an old grandma's wispy beard. So I hot glue a bunch of wires together and tuck them under the neck flange cover, and then he's finished. Alright, we did it, and I am super pumped about how this one came out. The graffiti, especially the wizard tag, might be the first graffiti I've done that I'm legitimately proud of, that it actually turned out the way I had it pictured in my head. So that's super encouraging and, I don't know, kind of cool. Anyway, stick around for the glamour shots, and huge thanks to Ross Learn from Tyrannosaurus Dimension for letting me use his music in this video. I'm usually of the mind that most instrumental metal would be better with vocals, but I make exceptions for Chris Poland, Animals as Leaders, and now Tyrannosaurus Dimension. My favorite album of his is Part 2, Primal Nature. But the latest one, Part 3, Visions Beyond, is climbing up the charts for me, so you really can't go wrong with either one. They're both great. Go check them out, link in the description. Let me know what you think, and let me know if there's any other instrumental metal that you think I should check out. Tyrannosaurus Dimension glamour shots coming right up, so look out! These riffs are heavy, super memorable, and dope as all get out. Just like you. Thanks for watching, thanks for being my friend, and until next time, keep making it weird.
Hurry